Okay, so
All right, so Bill, we'll start taking questions at about 20 before the hour. Is that enough, you think? Or you want to just tell us when you're ready for questions?
Oh, look, I'm ready for questions anytime. You know, whichever way you want to play it is fine by me. I can be pretty nimble.
Okay.
all right, we've got 34 in the wait, or 38 in the waiting room now. So I'll just admit the waiting room, and here we go. All good.
Right. All good.
I'm just getting a message saying that my just bear.
Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. We're going to get just a few more minutes. I'm Susan Depew, one of the founders at Camino for Good, and we're really excited about the program tonight. We're going to wait just a minute to see, let some more people in. Those of you that were early and right on time, we really appreciate that. We're very excited about our guest tonight, or today, this morning, depending on where you are.
Hey, everyone.
The other founders I have with me are Lindsay in Australia and Bill Austin out in California. And so Bill's going to help later with taking questions. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat as they come up. And then Lindsay, of course, is recording and doing all the behind the scenes stuff and keeping us on track like he always does. Or like he always tries to. How's that? So we had over 100 people sign up. So I want to give a chance for a few more people. Here's another Susan from Canada. Hi, Susan. I'm getting some notes
Oh,
here.
Ingrid. G'day, Ingrid. How are you? Lovely to see you. Oh, crikey, all these people. I'm getting a bit nervous. Yeah. It's lovely to see all these people here. Fantastic.
Yes. All right, let me tell you who our speaker is today, and I'm sure you know because you showed up to hear him. But as I was getting ready for my Camino, I started reading books. And when I ran across a book called The Way, My Way by Bill Bennett, I fell in love with the whole idea, with the author, with the way he told the story. It was funny and yet spiritual. So that year for Christmas, everybody on my list got a copy of Bill's book. And so after we came back from our journeys over walking the Camino and started Camino for Good, one of my dreams was, do you think Bill Bennett would come and speak at the cafe? So when I reached out, I was immediately impressed with a quick response with, I like what you're doing, I want to help. And so our meeting with Bill, he was wonderful and said, just let me know how I can help. And as you know, he's a writer, a producer, director of some feature films. He's won awards, best picture, best director. He does documentaries. And of course, his book, The Way, My Way, became a bestseller, and it has an option for something I'm really excited about, is maybe another movie about his book would be wonderful. He's done 4 more Caminos, and so I'm not going to take any more of his time. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Susan, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. And Lindsay and Bill as well. Thank you.
So when we first started talking, like Bill said, you can't live on the Camino. You have to bring the Camino home. And so what he's going to talk to us about is how you bring the Camino home with you and how you live it. So Bill.
Well, crikey, it's such a huge subject, Susan, and please jump in and ask questions, and Lindsay and Bill as well. You know, so much depends upon the experience that you've had on the Camino. I mean, I know some people who've gone on the Camino and done it as a bucket list thing. You know, and they tick it off the box and they come back and they go on with their life as though nothing has really happened. There are other people, and I would put myself in this category, where the Camino has had a profound change on them. I mean, I now classify my life, and I'm quite serious when I say this. I classify my life as pre-Camino and post-Camino. That's how much a profound change the Camino had on me. You know, but it's quite interesting because I wasn't aware of it at the time. You know, it's not suddenly you wake up one morning having come back from the Camino and go, I'm changed, everything's different. You know, it's not like that at all. It's a very subtle thing, you know, and it takes quite a long time. But I now look at my life and think, I could not have done that in the manner that I did had I not walked the Camino. And you look at, you know, somebody like Paul Coelho. I'm not sure whether that's how you pronounce his name, but he walked the Camino and then he wrote The Alchemist, you know, which is one of the, I think it sold over 100 million copies. Had a profound effect on people. You know, he could not have, and he said that as well. I mean, he also wrote the book, The Pilgrimage as well, which was directly about walking the Camino. But he says he could not have written The Alchemist had he not walked the Camino. And it's one of the things that I want to get to shortly, really, but of how you can actually put the Camino into service, not only for yourself, but for other people. But, you know, Susan, I was thinking about it, you know, preparing for this thing. And I was thinking, well, okay, so what are the things that you can get from the Camino? You can get camaraderie, friendships, you know, Camino families and this bonding, physical exercise, simplicity. The Camino forces you to simplify your life right down to the very basics. You can have spiritual insights. Not everybody does, but some people can. One of the things that struck me about the Camino was the generosity of spirit, the generosity of strangers. For me, anyway, I learned gratitude, extraordinary gratitude. You're grateful for a bed sometimes at night. You know, you're grateful for a hot shower. You're grateful for it, you know, not getting blisters or something like that. Humility. That was probably the biggest change for me, was humility and the pain that I suffered because I had a bad knee. Anybody who's read the book understands that. That was the thing that really humbled me, was the pain. And one of the really important things, I think, is you start to realize just how little you need. You know, and when you're whittling down your backpack, you know, so that you can get it down to, you know, the lowest weight possible, you start to think, well, how can I actually bring that concept back into my life, back home? And you come back home and you look around, you think, I don't need all this stuff. You know, I know a lot of people who've come back from the Camino and just done an absolute clean out, you know, got rid of all the stuff that they just don't need. You know, so those are the things that I think are important. But you know, how do you bring gratitude back? How do you bring humility back? And I sort of made up a bit of a list of how you can keep the Camino with you when you come back. I mean, I've kept a lot of not most, but a good deal of my friends are Camino people. You know, we go out and have dinner, and it's with Camino people. It doesn't matter how many Caminos you've walked, if you just walk one or if you just walk part. There is a commonality, you know, that binds you when you're talking to a Camino person. One way that people keep the Camino with them is by joining forums or Facebook groups. And I'm in several Facebook groups, Camino related. They read books. They have, I've been to some places where they have frames, like, you know, these electronic frames which flip photos, and they've got photos of the Camino, and they keep it in their kitchen, you know, and these photos come up and they come up and they come up. And this reminds them of that extraordinary time that they had on the Camino. Some people regularly bake Santiago cakes, you know, and see, I've got, actually, I don't know whether it'll come up here, but I've got this, see that Camino ring. Now, what happened was when I got to Santiago, I took a photo of the big sculpture on the side of the cathedral. And then I took that photo back to, I was looking around Santiago for a jeweler because I wanted to get a ring, but I couldn't find anything that was really, you know, robust and suitable. So I took it back to a jeweler back in Sydney. I gave him the photograph, and then he's made up this ring. There it is, based on the photograph on the side of the cathedral. And then for a birthday gift, I got him to make up a pendant for Jennifer as well. You know, so I mean, this does not come off my finger. This is worn constantly. You know, so these are some ways that you can keep that memory and that feeling of the Camino. I keep in touch with the people that I walk with. You know, people who have read the book know that I formed friendship with the initial taxi ride from Biarritz Airport to St. John. A couple of years back, two of them came from Hungary. A couple of years back, Jennifer and I specifically went to Hungary just to meet up with them again. You know, and I mean, as you know, and anybody who's walked the Camino knows, over a very, very short, intense period of time, you can form relationships that will last a lifetime. You know, they will last a lifetime. And I liken it, and I think I mentioned this in the book, it must be like soldiers going into battle, you know, that extraordinary sense of bonding, you know, that happens because the experiences on the Camino are intense. And through this intensity, these bonds and these friendships last. Anyway, have I said enough?
Well, one of the things that you talk about in the book is that at some point along the Camino, everyone's going to meet an angel, their Camino angel. Talk about that a little bit. Who are your angels?
It's a really interesting concept, this. You know, I remember, and I don't know whether this is in the book or not. I don't think it is, but I stayed at, you know, the famous little albergue in St. John, Chemin, L'Esprit du Chemin, I think it is. It was called that. I think it's called something else now. And, you know, we had a dinner, a round table dinner the night before we were due to walk, and everybody had to get up and say something. And I got up and I said, at some point along the Camino, you're going to meet an angel. Everybody stared at me. I went, oh God, I should have shut my mouth. Felt like an absolute dork. But there's a couple of things about this. I mean, there's, who did I mean? Oh, crikey. You know, it's those fleeting things, you know, somebody who just helps you, just comes along, and like I had really bad blisters at some point. And this, one of these albergues, this nurse just treated my blisters, and she was just extraordinary. And my blisters were putrid. I mean, you know, they would turn your stomach. You would have a look at one of my blisters and you would go away and puke. I mean, they were that bad. And this woman was just extraordinary. You know, she just, she was an angel. But the other thing that occurred to me, and it only occurred to me later, Susan, is that even unwittingly, you can be an angel for somebody else. And that's the thing that really kind of hit me hard. It's like, wow, you can be an angel for somebody else. And it might just be something that you say, you know, an offhand comment to somebody, a stranger who comes up and starts walking beside you. And they get to tell you something that's important. You see, I've got this theory that everybody who walks the Camino has a question that they want the Camino answered for them. They may not even know they have a question. Sometimes they do know, sometimes like somebody loses their job, or they've got a medical issue or something like that. And so that they walk the Camino wanting some kind of insight. But I do believe that everybody who walks the Camino does have a question. You know, what should I do with my life? Should I stay with this person or should I not? Should I go into this business relationship? Should I not? Whatever. And the Camino will answer that question. The answer may not come immediately. Sometimes it does. But you can be the angel, that precipitates change in other people. And that's the really interesting thing, without you even knowing it. Because I do regard the Camino as being an 800-kilometer confessional box, And sometimes a psychiatrist couch as well. But what happens is that, you'll be walking along and then suddenly somebody will come up beside you and you get talking to them. And then suddenly they just go, tell you their life story. And they tell you things that they probably would not tell anybody else because they know that it's a confessional box, and you will probably never see them again. They'll probably never see you again, and they walk on. Certainly in my case, because everybody walked faster than me. And yeah.
And I found that to be true because you're walking, so you're not looking at each other, and there's a cadence about it, and there's a rhythm. And
That's
you
true.
talk about that when you get to the Meseta and you talk about what it meant to you. Mm-hmm. Talk about how how the priest told you, and I don't remember if the priest told Ivan the Terrible this or if the priest told you. You mentioned them together, that the Camino is divided into 3 stages: life, death, and rebirth. Mm-hmm. Talk about how that played out for you. That was a beautiful concept.
Yeah, it really was. It was Ivan that told me that. And we were just about to climb up onto the Meseta, in fact. The lovely track out past Castellares, heading up that zigzag hill, and then you're not really quite on the Meseta at that point, but it's sort of getting there. And Ivan told me the story. It was a priest that told him. But when I thought back on it, it kind of fits, and you get to the Meseta, and it is like death. I mean, at that point, if anybody has started from St. John or even earlier, the Meseta I found to be cleansing. I found it to be an incredibly spiritual place. And I know some people skipped through the Meseta. Interestingly, I found a lot of British people did, because people who walk in Britain, they're used to having little villages come up, quite regularly at short intervals. You see, we in Australia, we're used to vast spaces. So, maybe it's the fact that the Meseta didn't bother me because I'm used to these really, really expansive spaces. But I found it to be a hypnotic place. And Susan, you talk about the metronomic nature of the walk. I found the Meseta to be very much that. I was fortunate in that I had pretty good weather and I didn't have too much wind. But I know people have had a really tough time on the Meseta because of bad weather. But even so, I think I found the Meseta to be like a furnace. and not so much in heat, but in terms of like burning off all the impurities. And interestingly, I had bad trouble with my knee. And that's just because I'm stupid, you know, like I trained too hard before I went on my first Camino, and I pushed it too hard and I just buggered up my knee. I was pretty much at that point walking on about 3,000 milligrams of ibuprofen a day and about 6 Coke Zeros a day. That's how I was keeping walking. And I got to the Meseta and something weird happened. The pain went away. Like, I'm not joking, the pain went away. And I had about 2 weeks almost pain-free. It came back later on, and I can't explain that other than I do believe the Meseta has this particular potency. Yeah, like you know, it's a deeply spiritual place, I think.
Before I turn this over to Bill and the questions he's getting, you know, you talked about a lot about your PGS, your personal guidance system.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that and how that still guides you.
Well, look, it's a really interesting question because I don't know whether anybody's seen the film. It's now available out on Amazon and Google Play and so forth. So if they're interested, they can have a look there. But basically, I had a situation about 10 years earlier where I was driving to the airport. I was in New Orleans at the time. I was driving to the airport very early in the morning. I heard a voice which said, "Slow down." I'd never happened to me before. And I slowed down. Big truck went through an intersection, ran through a red light. It just missed me. If it hadn't been for that voice, I would have died. But I tried to make a film about this, and I couldn't get the film up because, well, for various reasons. You know, I wanted to explore intuition, and there wasn't really the money out there in the film industry for this kind of movie at the time. So I decided that I would walk the Camino and dedicate this movie that I wanted to make to PGS, Personal Guidance System, this film. So as part of that, I decided that I would walk the Camino intuitively. Now, anybody who knows me knows that that's absolutely the antithesis of what I am, because, you know, I like to plan things. I like to plan things, you know, A plan, B plan, C plan. I like to know exactly where I'm going, and I like to know where I'm going to be spending the night, you know, what food I'm going to be eating at, all of this. I threw all that out the window when I decided to walk the Camino. I decided that I would just do the walk intuitively. And what I discovered was that led me to places and to people that I wouldn't have gone, you know, had I been more structured in my walk, you know, had I been more analytical. I met people that had lists of all of the albergues and all of their facilities and the pluses and the minuses, and they'd read all the reviews and all that sort of thing. I mean, I had maps, obviously, but I didn't have any of that stuff. I'd done absolute zero research, zero planning. I was determined to do the walk absolutely intuitively. But here's the thing. When I came back from the Camino, what I learned from the Camino enabled me to make the film. And the following year, I made the film. I started making the film. Now, I would not, and I mean this absolutely, I would not have been able to make that movie had I not walked the Camino. And that's why I say, you know, the Camino for me has been my life before the Camino, my life after the Camino. It had that much of a profound impact on my life.
Wow. Wow, interesting. I have some more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Bill. I've monopolized enough. Thank you,
Well,
Bill.
thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Yeah, so we actually do have a question in, and it sort of relates to what you were just talking about, Bill. And it was sort of from excuse me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but Men and Banta. And you're curious between your experiences between the first Camino and your subsequent Caminos. Different experiences, similar. How did they relate to each other, if at all?
Really good question. Maybe the first Camino is like your first kiss. You always remember it as being something special. Subsequent Caminos, look, I did 2 Portuguese Caminos. I did the Via di Francesca, and I did part of the Jakobsweg in Germany. Nothing really did compare to that first Camino. But I got to say, every Camino is different, and there are parts of the Portuguese Camino that are just extraordinary. You know, like there's that crikey, I can't remember it. There's that beautiful rock in that sanctuary where St. James were supposedly preached. Somebody on this, I'm sure, would remember the name of it. But that to me is one of the really special parts. You got to walk off the Camino a little bit to Portuguese Camino. It's up near the. Sweetie, you remember the name of it?
It's at the end of the Camino. It's the last town.
It's the last town before you get in. I can't remember. But anyway, so that's where St. James supposedly preached, and I regard that as one of the most special places in the world.
Do you have plans for your next Camino yet?
But what I want to do, is I want to do what the original pilgrims did. I want to walk out my front door here in Mudgee in Australia, and I want to walk to Santiago. Now, that does involve crossing passages of water, and I am trying to raise my vibration so I can actually do that on foot, but I might need a plane. But I'm quite serious. I've mapped it out. It's about 3,000 kilometers. What I'd like to do is I'd like to walk from here, Mudgee, to Sydney Airport, which is about 300k. Catch a plane. I'd like to fly to London and go to my birthplace. So I'm actually born in London, and walk from my birthplace, then from there down to the English coast, cross into France, and then we'll walk from France all the way through to Santiago. I basically like to do what the original pilgrims did, and that is they walked out their front door and they walked to Santiago. That's what I like to do.
So, Mark Welsh points out that they also walked back.
They what?
They also walked back.
Sorry, I missed that.
The older pilgrims also walked back home. Are you planning on walking back
home? Oh, walk back
well?
home. Yeah, they do. And I tell you what, I admire them. But if I did that, no, I don't think I'd walk back. I think they'd have to carry me back.
And that's all I have for questions right now. Susan, did you have one? You had more on your list you wanted to do?
I've got one. Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
Lindsay's got one.
So on our last cafe, it was just sort of a general chat amongst our pilgrims, but the topic of the Camino blues came up. And I don't know if you've heard of the term, the Camino blues.
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's sort of, it's not a common thing, and it's sort of something that people don't talk about much, but it's the feeling that you have when you come home that's a little bit like depression, because you've had this amazing experience and now you don't know what to do, don't know how to implement it. I'm just wondering if you had that experience, or you know of people who may have had that sort of post-Camino, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life type thing.
Well, the other thing too, I think allied to that is the fact that you often come back to people who haven't shared the experience with you. And so they don't quite understand what you've been through. You know, there's that adds to it as well. I mean, I'm fortunate that, I mean, my wife didn't do my first walk with me, but I talked to her pretty much every day, and then she flew over to Santiago and met me at the end. So she had, and then in the subsequent Caminos I've done, she's walked with me. You know, so we are able to share it. But you know, Lindsay, I tell you what, it's probably one of the reasons why people go back and walk the Camino again and again. And I do, and I think I talk about this in the book. I do regard the Camino as being kind of like this hermetically sealed bubble, where you're protected from so much. You know, well, I think I say in the book, you don't have to put the garbage out each day. You know, you don't have to field phone calls. You don't have to, you know, worry about, you know, finances from day to day and things like this. So you're in this kind of really kind of protective bubble, and it can become very addictive, you know, because you're shielded from all of the buffeting. I mean, the other thing too about the Camino, which I find really quite fascinating, is that there's a lack of status on the Camino, which is really quite unique, because, and with a lack of status comes a lack of judgment. And to give you an example, you know, in the real world, you know, outside of the Camino, you meet somebody, you immediately make assessments on them based on what they're wearing, maybe what kind of watch they have, what kind of car they drive, if you know anything about circumstances, what job they're in, and so forth. With the Camino, all of that is stripped back, because basically people are wearing the same kind of clobber. You know, now, you know, some people might be wearing a little bit more fancy stuff or whatever, but, you know, I remember talking to this bloke near Zubiri quite early on, and I sort of you know, was thinking he's probably, you know, like a labourer or something like that. It turned out he was a judge. He worked in Hague, you know, and he'd flown in on a private jet, and he just decided that he'd walk three days across the Pyrenees, then, so he had to go back to the, you know, court of humanitarian justice or whatever it was he was doing, you know. So you can't judge people. You know, I know people in Singapore, you know, these Chinese markets you go to. The first thing they do when you walk into one of these markets is they judge you by your watch and by your shoes, you know, and so that's how they kind of assess you as what they're going to sell for you. You know, but everybody on the Camino basically has the same kind of stuff. So you know, judgment, this sort of lack of status, I think, is really quite interesting. And with that comes the folly of judgment, because you can make judgments about people and then you're proven absolutely wrong. Yeah, I don't know whether that answered your question quite.
No, it did quite well. It's something that I'd like to pursue. You know, in your personal guidance system, Camino Blues is something I'd like to sort of research a bit, because I find it fascinating how people try and bring that Camino spirit, I don't know what you'd call it, back home, and the transition they go through. Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've got this theory, and I think I expressed it in the book, that I've got no interest in walking the Appalachian Trail or you know, or doing anything like that. I mean, I'm interested in walking pilgrimages, you know, but not because I'm a Catholic or a religious person. I believe, a spiritual person. But I have this theory that what makes the Camino special, and one of the reasons why you have these extraordinary stories of really quite elderly people in their 80s and 90s walking the Camino, or people with health issues walking the Camino and then finding those health issues pretty much gone at the end, is that I believe that as everybody walks, they leave a soul imprint on the ground. And that imprint goes into the path, into the Camino, and then comes back up to those people who are receptive to it. So what happens is that you've got the accumulation of hundreds and hundreds of years of people with spiritual intent that leave that soul imprint in this path on the way. And then those who open up themselves to it can extract that spiritual imprint from the millions of pilgrims who've been before, and they take that with them, and that imbues them with something, with a quality, with a spirit that they wouldn't have had they not walked the Camino.
I had the sense too that there's generations to come, and that I'm part of that time continuum in the future. There's going to be, when we walk and look back 500 years hence, there'll be people looking back, and I'll be part of that that imprint that you've just talked about. So thanks for that.
You will be, Lindsay. Yeah. I mean, I've been doing quite a bit of reading. I'm writing a new book at the moment. I've been doing quite a bit of reading on quantum mechanics. And there is a crossover really between spirituality and quantum mechanics on a deeper level. But what I'm saying kind of fits within quantum theory as well. And so you can look at it from a spiritual point of view. You can also look at it from a quantum mechanical point of view as well. It's interesting, isn't it? It's really fascinating. But you hear these stories, remarkable stories of people who are healed by the Camino. They're genuine stories of healing, and you could call them miracles.
It's interesting, Bill, that you mentioned quantum mechanics. I've also kind of fallen into researching and reading about quantum mechanics. And I think a big reason for that is so many of the unexplained coincidences, I guess you would call them, that happened during the Camino that I just don't think were coincidences. And I find quantum mechanics very interesting in how they try to scientifically prove that there is a connection there. There's absolutely a connection. And for me, the Camino, for the second time in my life, really brought that connection home. There's too many things that I couldn't just chalk up for coincidence. So I'll probably contact you later on some what you're reading on quantum mechanics right now, because I find it to be fascinating.
Yeah, and we talked before about angels. So what exactly is an angel? Is what might appear to be a chance meeting or a coincidental meeting. Is that, if you like, an angel interference, or intervention, I guess I'm trying to say, angelic intervention. The more I go into it, Bill, the more I'm really quite intrigued by it. And there's something special about the Camino. It's just really as simple as that. I mean, I met some people, and probably, people on this podcast have met people who look at it as, we talked before about it being an 800-kilometer confessional. They look at it as being an 800-kilometer party. Well, normally they pike out after about 300 or 400 kilometers because they're partying too hard. But that's okay. Everybody gets from the Camino something, and even the people who go there just to party and have a good time can come back with something, that cold cocks them later on. And it might be a couple of years later on, but it has that impact. I do believe it does have that impact. Yeah.
Well, one of the
Yeah,
stories. Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Bill.
Just real quick, I remember meeting a guy, he called his description of the Camino was the greatest pub crawl in all of Europe.
Yeah, well, look, I've met people like that, and I've got to admit, I got to I did one section of the Portuguese Camino. I was with some friends, and we got to a bar, and we discovered that they had this. Jen, what was that?
White port.
They had white port at this Portuguese little tiny place in Portugal, and I'd never had white port before, and I was determined to try it. And that pretty much wiped out the other rest of the day. And we it's interesting. I've got a my wife and I've got a Zoom call on Sunday night with 4 friends from the Camino, that we keep in touch with. In fact, they were on that, they had that white port with us that day. And it's still something that we chuckle about. It's still something that we keep alive. But the friendship has stayed alive. And they're in, one couple is in Victoria, the other is in Queensland. And that's what I mean about bringing the Camino home. And sometimes you got to work at it.
One of the things that you did in this book that was so much fun was how you tell the stories. And there are a lot of favorite stories in here, but how you talk about how the Camino was able to shift your thinking. Do you remember that was linked to trekking poles? And you made that so funny. When you want to talk about what you wanted to walk with versus the trekking poles, you want to tell that story?
Yeah, look, I will, Susan, but I'll just go back one step, if I can, and and talk about why I chose the tone that I did for that book, because the book is very humorous, but it also is deeply personal. It's raw at times, it's unfiltered. I'm really quite honest. And the feedback I've had is that one of the reasons why people like it is because it is very self-deprecating and very honest. But when you write the mere kind of nature of writing a memoir is narcissistic. It's narcissistic in that you're talking about yourself, and you feel that people might be interested in what you think, you write about yourself. And so really one of the reasons why I chose the humorous tone that I did was to combat that narcissism that is implicit in memoirs. And the other thing too is that I'd read a lot of books, Camino books, before I walked the Camino. And they were all so bloody self-important, and they were like, and I was just thinking, all right, well, look, if I'm going to write a book, then it's got to be different. It's got to be something that provides something different. And you've got to see the joy in all of this. You've got to, and the absolute absurdity. I mean, how absurd is it that somebody would leave their job and fly to another country without speaking that language and put some backpack on their back and walk 800 kilometers across that country for no apparent reason? Like I had no idea why I was doing it, none whatsoever. It's not that I was having a midlife crisis or anything like that, but I just had this incredible compulsion to do it. And I drove my wife mad. I mean, when I was deciding whether or not I would choose an Osprey backpack as against a Judah backpack, I'd go backwards and forwards over it, and it used to drive her nuts. One time she came up into my study and I was you might remember this. I was weighing my underpants on the kitchen scales.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. And I was writing it all down dutifully on my spreadsheet and so forth. And, like, how crazy is that? That's funny. But, this sort of level of obsession that you get to, when you undertake the Camino, I think you've got to see the humorous side of things. But getting back to your question about the poles. Okay, so I live in this country town, Mudgee. Okay, I'll go back one step. Jennifer and I were in Galicia. This is how I came to walk the Camino initially. We were in Galicia. We were with our daughter. She was living in Spain at the time. She was writing a book, and so we stayed in this very small Galician town while she was writing this book. And we would drive around, and it just so happened that we were very close to the Norte. And I would see these pilgrims walking, and I started to get intrigued by them. And one time we stopped at this little town, and there were this group of pilgrims sitting around outside a cafe. And I started to observe them, kind of like an anthropologist would observe it, like a foreign culture. And I was looking at their backpacks and their shoes and stuff like that. And I was looking at their poles. And one of these pilgrims had this really lovely pole. Anyway, so I went in to buy a drink or something from the store. And I saw there was this rack of pilgrims' staffs there. So I bought one. And it was this beautiful thing. It was, it was like misshapen, and it had this beautiful kind of like, it was like a branch. It was a branch, but it had been a little bit whittled back. And so when we went back to where we were staying in this Galician village, I started to train with this pole, with this sort of, wooden branch that had been sort of shaped really quite nicely. I got really attached to this. And then I got attached to this romantic notion of what a pilgrim is. This is the thing. And being a pilgrim has like a pilgrim's pole. They don't have walking poles. Walking poles are robotic. They're harsh, ugly, technical things. And I didn't want that. That wasn't my idea of what a pilgrim was. My idea of a pilgrim, was like these pictures of St. James. And he doesn't have walking poles. He's got one of these old wizened, I call them gnarled and knobbly walking poles. And I got really attached to this pole in Spain. I had to leave it behind. I couldn't take it on the thing. So when I got back to Australia and I continued my walking, continued my training, I found another wooden branch like that. So, and then when I got to walk the first Camino, I spent a long time trying to find a suitable wooden staff that was this sort of misshapen thing. But then I realized that with the pain in my leg, this wooden staff, this beautiful wooden pole that I had, wasn't going to do it for me. It wasn't going to get me to Santiago. And it was sort of like it was like a big turning point in my Camino for me, because what it meant is that I had to give away the romantic notion of being a pilgrim, the romantic notion being, with the wooden staff and, all this sort of stuff. And I had to ask myself, all right, do I want to keep hold of this romantic notion and not finish the Camino? Or do I want to take on walking poles, these things that I absolutely detested, but would aid me in a very, in a very real way, aid me to completing my walk. And of course I took the poles on. But it was a very, very interesting moment for me because what it was, and I detail this in the book, of course, is that it came down to a deeper question of, am I capable of change? Am I fixed? Am I fixed in my opinions too much that I will go, no, I'm going to stick with this gnarled, knobbly wooden staff that I've got because I like that. I like the image of that. Or am I going to be practical and say, no, I want to finish the Camino. I've got to take on walking poles. And I got to say, within about 2 or 3 days, I realized it was the best decision I'd ever made, to take those walking poles. And I would not have completed the Camino had I not, I think it was a pair of Leckies. And I wouldn't walk any distance now without walking poles. But what I found really quite interesting was the fact that it challenged me. It challenged me to go, right, am I going to accept change or am I not? And that was one of the really critical things that I learned from the Camino, just from that one decision, from going from that wooden staff to the walking poles.
You said do I have the ability to shift my thinking, is the way you put it. Yeah. Yeah. And I keep saying this, but I love the humor in it, but it was such a spiritual book because you did share and you were at times raw. And I think that is why I know that's why it spoke to me and why I thought it would my friends. So thank you.
I am in the process. I got a call from a distributor, a film distributor. He read the book. A gentleman who, quite a veteran film distributor, around about my age, and called me up and said that he'd read the book and it had a deeply, deeply profound effect on him, and asked me whether I would be interested in making a movie on it. And I said, because I'm a filmmaker, that's what I do. And I said, no, I don't want to make a film about myself. Are you kidding me? I couldn't think of anything, number one, more boring. and number two, I mean, like, who's going to play me? The only person who can play me is Hugh Jackman, but he's not buffed enough. He needs to. But anyway, so I said, no, I'm not interested in doing film. I don't think there's a film in it. It's very internal. It's a very internal book. And how do you actually put that on screen? Anyway, so he was determined. So he said, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 3 writers to write up treatments, and then I'll pass them by you and see what you think. So he got these 3 writers separately, and they drew up these treatments, and horrible.
Oh.
Like none of them had walked the Camino. They didn't know what it was about. One had me being pursued by a bear. One had me a rancher living in Mudgee, rustling cattle, all this sort of stuff, And finally, it seemed like he was really determined to proceed. I said, look, I'll give it a shot. So I sat down and I wrote this draft of the screenplay. I had to disassociate myself from myself. I had to write myself as a separate character. So I had to look at myself as being somebody totally separate from me. And he liked the draft, and so it's now kind of in process to make a film on.
Wow. Well, I hope so. I hope that works.
I hope so too.
Bill Austin, anything else from you?
No, not at the moment.
Is Ingrid still on? Ingrid.
I think I see someone. I think I see her shaking her head.
Oh, Ingrid, g'day. How are you? Do you have any questions? I'm sure you do. No. Lovely to see you.
Bill, thank you so much for coming. Your next where are you walking next? Oh, never mind. You told us. You're gonna walk out the front door.
I'd like to do that. Yeah. I mean, I came back from the Camino, thinking that my body would heal myself. What happened was that I lost sensitivity in my foot that had the bad knee, and I thought that'll go away. But after about 4 months, it didn't. So I went to a neurologist, and the neurologists discovered that because of my bad knee and my walking, I had pinched a nerve in my back, and that had affected my ability to have sensitivity in my foot. He said, look, leave it about 6 months or so, it'll get better. But then I went to an orthopedic surgeon because my knee wasn't healing itself. And the orthopedic surgeon, they took scans and everything and said I was bone on bone. And that all the cartilage in my knee had gone. And that effectively I'd walked the Camino bone on bone. And he said, look, a knee replacement is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now that was 7 years ago, and I've walked probably about 10,000 kilometers since.
Wow.
Without a knee replacement, without any, injecting any WD-40 or whatever into my knee. I've just listened to my body. I've just taken it easy when I've needed to. I've pulled back, and I've just kept on walking. So, I mean, I know a lot of Camino people who've had knee replacements. I will never have a knee replacement. Never. I do believe that if you're careful and if you really do listen to your body, and if you're sensible, then you can heal yourself. And I think this is part of the spiritual growth, I guess, that I've gone through this whole process. And it's the extraordinary thing about the Camino, I think, as well,
I do too. We're getting some great comments about what a wonderful hour it's been listening to you and for your sharing. Someone said, I think it was Ingrid, said that once you get to, Ingrid, where was it? She'll join you on your next pilgrimage, but she's going to wait till you get to Europe.
Oh, cool.
I don't blame you.
Cool.
Absolutely. I'll join you somewhere in Paris.
There you go.
Oh wow, that'd be pretty amazing, Ingrid. Well, I've been waiting to make a film so I can get to the Toronto Film Festival to see you.
Well, considering we have been friends now for 8 years, and we still haven't met in person.
That's true. Yeah.
That tells you much about our friendship, how deep it really is. Yeah.
Absolutely, Ingrid. Thank you. Susan, I started off a blog when I first started the Camino. What happened was, before I left, Jennifer said, look, you've got to do something so that you can keep in touch with the family and so forth. And I love taking photographs. And so we talked about maybe starting a Facebook page or something like that. And then I think she said this suggestion of starting off a blog. So I started off a blog with about 22 people, just close family and friends. About 2 weeks into the Camino, I had a following of about 3,000 people. And I started getting these messages. I got this one message from this lady. I was walking across the Camino, and I just kept on walking. That particular day, I think I walked 45 kilometers. And I got in late, and I didn't post my blog till about 10:30 that night. And I got this very irate message from this woman the next day saying, please do not be late anymore. I had to stop, pull over by the side of the road, go to work to read your blog, so do not be late again. And I started to realize, bloody hell, I got these people now looking over my shoulder. I can't stop, like I can't pike out. I can't just say, okay, like the knee's really hurting. I'll see you later, guys. It was incredible. But what I was going to say was this. I've kept the blog going. I mean, it's a little bit hit and miss now, a bit intermittent. But I did what I called audits after the Camino. I started to do some reflective pieces. And I did this blog post called Sex on the Camino. Well, you know what? I was going back through my stats the other day, and this blog post, Sex on the Camino, is the most viewed post I have done. It's like, and now 8 years later, I'm getting like 5 or 6 views a day for this blog post called Sex on the Camino.
Lindsay, you got to put the link up for us.
Oh, I will, yeah. Well, if somebody just goes on to pgstheway.com and then just Googles Sex on the Camino, it'll come up. But I'm astonished, like 8 years later, 4 or 5 people around the world are reading this blog, Sex on the Camino. It's hilarious. Yeah,
That's fun. So, all right, we're at the top of the hour. Anything else, Bill? Oscar?
No, just like you mentioned, there's been some really wonderful comments, Bill. I think people have really appreciated and enjoyed this hour. And thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Lindsay. You know, like I said straight up, it's fantastic what you're doing. You know, really fantastic what you're doing. And I know some people who own albergos on the Camino. They're doing it tough at the moment. You know, so it's just wonderful what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, we feel very blessed for the group of people that are on this call and what you've done to make that happen. So thank you to all of you. And so we're signing off now. Again, thanks to everybody.
And thanks, Ingrid. And thanks
everyone.
Bye-bye.